For those who might be here for the first time, as Robin said, my name's Raelle, and I'm the senior pastor here. And you just heard me tell the guys that we've been doing Sabbath sermons for the last 3 or 4 weeks. Yeah? So far, we've covered things like, excuse me, I have to change this because it's right on my multifocal line, and my eyes can't decide which way they're supposed to be reading right now.
That failed.
Yeah, that did. While she sorts it, I'm going to take the iPad and just keep talking while she gets it sorted. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Lovely. Now it's in the right section. Yeah, what can you do with multifocals? It can't be on the line. We've covered things like we did in the first full week around Sabbath as a rhythm. That it's this balance between work and rest and the importance of how God, which we just said before, took that rest, took that moment, and he didn't do so out of exhaustion because God does not get tired or weary. He did that to enjoy. And we talked about the balance of play and pray, the Eugene Peterson version of how do we say that. That it needs both or it gets a little out of whack. It either becomes too legalistic or it just becomes any old sort of day off. We've talked about last week that Sabbath is liberation or freedom. That actually God hadn't instituted that they do it as a law until they were out of Egypt. And before that, in Exodus 16, he models it for them. He has them get into that rhythm with manna and with quail that he provided day in, day out, except on the 6th day, enough for them to collect for 2 days. And the only time that it didn't end up in maggots in it for the whole day was on the 6th day. It lasted 2 days. And we talked about the importance that therefore we're no longer slaves and how that can be that we're not slaves to the jobs that are required, both our job, our work out in a workplace and our work at home. That maybe there's value in trusting God. And we've seen that God's heart for the Sabbath is a gift for us, an invitation to set aside time and to make it holy. That's all it is. Holy means set aside for God. That's it. Often we, I think, as an aside, can get caught up in thinking we're not holy enough to be before God. Except the meaning isn't, I've got to have some, I want to say holier than thou. That goes to show you how we use that word these days. Some wonderful, perfect way of being. No, in fact, it just means I'm set aside for God. The same way the 6th day is. We looked at some practices like Sabbath boxes, time frames for breaks, which days and when and how long, life-giving lists, preparation for Sabbath tasks, how to sort of enter in the threshold idea of how we prepare ourselves to be ready to step in. If you hear some of that and hadn't heard them before, they're up. Well, last week's isn't yet, but will be. Due to sickness, it's just going to take a little bit longer. But they'll all be up and you can listen back to them should you want to. But I want to ask you, what have you found so far as you've stepped into Sabbath? Talk amongst, just share with someone. It might be a baby step. It might be as much as I've just started contemplating it. What have you found so far as you have stepped into Sabbath thinking? Baby steps are fine. Take a minute. I love the conversations. I'd encourage you to continue to have them. And I really want to set as a reminder, baby steps are okay, and that could be your first baby step is even contemplating. I started exploring this about 8.5 years ago, something like that. It has taken time for thought and belief and agreement to move to action. It's a direction and a journey. Now, as we talked about, we're going to start this week, I just asked the kids a reminder, what did God do on the seventh day? And we said he rested. And we talked about even just a minute ago that rest wasn't because of exhaustion. It was in order to enjoy or delight in what he had created. Take a minute with me. Actually, where you are, kids, tell me, do you remember what day men and women were created? Do any of the kids remember that? What? Kids remember that? There's no kids. Oh, it was you. I thought it was an adult answering because I forgot you were here. Jack, you're so good at being quiet and you're getting too tall. What day was it? The sixth day. Created on the sixth day. So tell me, what was their first full day of life experience? Caleb. The seventh day, which was the Sabbath. What was their first experience of life? Enjoying and delighting in creation. Just something to think through on how important God has it that we would enjoy. Now, we still call it the seventh day because it's the seventh day in creation, although we've discussed before, for the Jewish nation, that was from Friday night to Saturday night. You may decide for you that's where it works best. That's okay. But it has moved as a broader concept in Christendom to Sunday, because that's the day we celebrate as a community, and community worship is a part of Sabbath. And we moved it to that day, historically, in recognition of the day that Jesus rose from the grave, or the best estimate of how that happened. I think if you do the maths, I'm a little confused sometimes on Easter and 3 days later, but it's 2 days later. And there are different views on that, yeah? But let's say we stuck to Sunday. So we're going to talk as a church about it as Sunday. But I think it's interesting to consider that man's first experience of a full day of life was a delight in Sabbath. And I think that's really good, because what can often happen is we get caught up in these Puritan rigidity of approach, this Christian piety of how we do Sabbath. I don't know, and I hadn't heard of this, but it's something I read. So I know Charles Dickens, and we know actually one of my favourite Christmas stories is A Christmas Carol, where there's actually a bit of that indictment on focusing on people's stinginess to the poor. Charles Dickens had a lot of criticism to aim at the supposed Christian piety of life. There's actually a little-known book called Little Dorrit, and it's also one where he is being critical of an aspect of how Victorian Christianity works. I say Victorian not as in this state, but as in during King Victoria's time. Queen Victoria's time. Wow, I'm a little modern. Because in this attack on the freedom, the lack of freedom found in the Victorian Sabbath, he writes, as a description, the narrator in the book says, a Sunday evening in London, gloomy, close, and stale. Melancholy streets in a penitential garb of soot, steeped in the souls of the people who were condemned to look at them out of the windows in dire despondency. Nothing for the spent toiler to do but compare the monotony of the seventh day with the monotony of his 6 days. He does not like the Sabbath. Now, there's probably a few reasons for that. One is that he doesn't know Jesus. We know that he didn't get a grasp on who Jesus is and what he brought, and how Sabbath can be a delight because of that. But also because there was such a lockdown of how the Sabbath day was supposed to be spent that it sapped the joy out of it. Unless you were someone who delighted in contemplating on your own and staying in your best clothes and not playing and getting dirty. I mean, imagine trying to have these guys dressed in their best clothing for the whole day, told to sit on their couches quietly, maybe probably read their Bible, pray, not run outside even on a beautiful day like today. And you have just described a form of torture. And that was, to a degree, what we expected. But this is not actually the view held by all people in that time period. A different Charles Spurgeon, he described it this way from the same time era. Time is the ring, and these Sabbaths are the diamond set in it. Isn't that beautiful? Or the Sabbaths are the beds full of rich, choice flowers. Or the pearl of the week is the day to feast yourself in God. They are full of brightness and joy and delight. I don't know if you picked up on the songs today, because incidentally, Kate had no idea what I was talking about, except it was Sabbath. And yet every one of them was about praise or joy or, no, praise. 3 of them were praise. 1 talked about joy, yeah? Because Sabbath is meant to be a delight. I briefly mentioned Isaiah 58 last week, and I think Dickens probably would have liked it. Because God's actually outlining the failures of the people. He's outlining that they're fasting and expecting a response because surely we've done the right thing. You seem eager to know my ways as if they were a nation that does what is right and has not forsaken the commands of its gods. Ask me for decisions and seem eager for God to come near. Why have we fasted, they say, and you have not seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. Remember our discussion last week around Sabbath, the second expression of the commandment in Deuteronomy, 40 years later when it's reaffirmed. Actually, in both of them it says, all people, including the foreigners and the people who work for you, are also to rest. It was a perfect equalizer. When I talk about equality, Sabbath is about equality. Doesn't matter who you are and where life's at, and bosses are supposed to make sure that people don't need to work on those days. They were exploiting people, treating them terribly, but saying, God, we're doing all the things you asked. No, you're not. And so Dickens would have liked the side of the indictment that happens before what's up there, when he says, is not this the kind of fast I have chosen? To loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor, wanderer with shelter? When you see the naked, to clothe them and to not turn away from your own flesh and blood? Then your light will break forth like the dawn and your healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. We, throughout Christendom, use that section of Scripture a lot for being engaged in community, in the type of action we take to make other people's lives better, not only our own. But how many of you have then gone on to notice what comes next? Because this is the part Dickens wouldn't have liked, but Charles Spurgeon understood. Then you will call, further down, from verse 13. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honourable, and if you honour it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, what do you then get? Then you will find your joy in the Lord. I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the lands and to feast on the inheritance of your father Jacob. The mouth of the Lord has spoken. What comes as we return to a Sabbath delight? Joy. And joy is something I think we can choose. But the starting place is seeing Sabbath as a delight for us. I came across this definition of delight. It's by Karen Holford, and it says, a complex sensory experience, something like wonder mixed with joy and gratitude. What delights your soul? What delights your body? What delights your spirit? Food, fragrance, vistas, trees, clouds. I want to learn to watercolour, and every time I think of it, it's because I want to paint the vista of clouds in the sky and the myriad of colours that comes from it. For me, what caught my attention, if we go to the next slide, was picking Pete up from Ford in Melton, and the median strip between the service lane and the double lane roads was one lone flower thriving in a sea of just nothingness and an awful lot of fumes. A Sabbath moment. Now, that wasn't on a Sunday, but it was a Sabbath moment and an opportunity to express gratitude to God. Timothy Keller says, because the world is full of ugly things, we need the Sabbath to feed our soul with beauty. The delight doesn't start with self and doing what is our own pleasure without thought to God. It starts first with God. Delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. I think a key part of that is that as we delight ourselves in the Lord, he is the desire that we get. From Psalm 37:4. Or, I delight to do your will, O God, and your law is within my heart, from Psalm 40, verse 8. The starting place is a focus on God. The starting place is what that definition said, that delight is something like wonder mixed with joy and gratitude. I think a starting place in the midst of whatever we're feeling, because we often aren't there when we enter Sabbath, is to start with gratitude, because gratitude changes everything. Interestingly, research shows, guys, that people who practice gratitude experience fewer aches and pains and report feeling healthier. I could do with a few less aches and pains. They've reported that it reduces emotional toxins in our system: envy, resentment, frustration, regret. That it enhances our empathy and reduces our aggression. I won't ask you to let me know if aggression is your issue, but anytime I feel frustration grow and my impatience diminishing, I need to pause, find a place of gratitude again. Remember what God has done for me. And it improves sleep. I'm always up for that. As a man thinks in his heart, so he is, and out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So what we say, what we declare, we make an agreement with. So the more we say certain things that are not filled with gratitude, the more we make them a part of our life. In the same way, the more we speak and use words, the more we grow that within our hearts. We have a choice. I think that delight and joy is something that don't just find us. I think there's something that we grab a hold of. There's something we cultivate. Yeah? Abundance is not a possession. It is utterly, completely, and solely about gratitude, says Dan Allender in this Sabbath book. Abundance is not about possession. It is utterly and completely and solely about gratitude. This, I believe, is a profound correlation between gratitude and joy and lack of gratitude and despair. So kids, may I have your attention a minute? Here's where I need your help. Is that okay? I've been talking about gratitude. Do you know what gratitude, what a definition of gratitude is? No? I reckon sometimes neither do the adults. So do you reckon you could help me find a definition for gratitude for them? I appreciate that, and she is smart, and I love it. But I don't want the answer because I got something for you guys to do. If I give away the answer now, are you happy to help us find the answer, kids? Around the room are A4 size pieces of paper with a single letter on them. Yeah, A4 is slightly bigger than this. Yeah? Can you find them? You get to choose one. Once you've found one, you've done. You come up here and till we find them all. Can you? There's some up here. Yep, done. Zach. There's one under a chair in the front row. Ollie, come check the chairs under. No, once you've got one. Zach, over there. Once you've got one, come up. Under the chairs. Look under the chairs. If someone wants to go into the longest cupboard that's open, I reckon they'll find one. I think a bed seems to have one from memory if that hasn't been found yet. You found an O. What have you found? A U. Up. Look up on the top. Yep. Can you see? Oh, he found it. You've got two. Who are you going to give it to since you've got two? Because it's one each. Who are you going to give it to? Come on up the front. Let's see if we can get a definition sorted. I want you to... I'll come back to that in a minute. We're going to do an activity right now. And so we're going to ask you to be in groups. We're going to activate a thank you right now. Because we can do thank yous to God and others. I really love Dan Allender in his book. He writes that in our family, Sabbath has been our day to write or call those who we most owe gratitude. Friends, enemies, because sometimes you do owe enemies a gratitude for what they've done within you, brought up that God can do within you. Acquaintances, the dead, the living. The letters never need to be sent. Some are winged away on Monday, yet to offer in black and white the bread of praise, we reconnected to those who have marked us with God. Who would you write to? Who would you write to God to thank? Today, there are two options for you. I think the first is the best, and I think the kids are going to enjoy it the best. But I want to recognize that each of us operates in our own ways. Firstly, it is this, Skittle gratitude, hence the Skittles. Well, not all the colours are there. But there's brown, brownie black. So purple is now brownie black because Skittles change what they do. And you don't as yet have one to belong to with kids, you can join a family or come up and grab a Skittles. Actually, I'll get Frank to head down the back with one pile and I'll have the other pile. You can grab... I gave it to him. His friend took it, but he can have another one. There you go. And let's do some thankfulness. If you want to walk around in case any... You can take that one, Robin, that's still free. Find a group, do some Skittle gratitude. If you could wind up for me and find your way back to seats for listening. Parents can decide what they want to do with, or adults can decide what they want to do with the leftover Skittles, whether it's for later or for now. Feel free to keep the pages if you would like to, in order to do so at home. Entirely up to you. Yeah. Or anything that's not that colour, but yeah. So something that you can do at home, but I thought today, in light of our mix of ages, it was a good thing to actually do. I think it's good for our souls as adults to do so. So... all right, I want to keep going if that's okay. So kids, we may get to our last activity. If not, you'll be taking it home with you. But apart from that, I also, you can head back to the pages that you want to do, or you can have a listen at the same time or instead. I want to say, it's really important to express that joy and hard things are not mutually exclusive. I don't want anyone to pretend. We don't gloss over and keep peace even in ourselves and pretend. That's false. Life has its challenges. Jesus himself actually told us, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome it. In the same broader section, there's a couple of chapters of this talk, he also adds that his desire is that his joy would be in them and their joy would be complete. Our joy. That his joy would be in us and our joy would be complete. So both can exist. This is our reminder, similar to our work is never done that we talked about last week, but Sabbath as freedom is to say we choose to stop and trust God. In the same way with the challenges we have going on, we don't pretend they don't exist. We choose to say on this day, I will still express gratitude to God. But in the process of ceasing, when we cease, sometimes even as we're doing gratitude, emotions can rise up. One, if we've not done rest and joy experience for a while, then we've got a deficit that needs to be made up. It actually might take time before we have things to offer in the broader sense or to find, because we're in recovery mode, not rest mode. That's okay. But then it might be other reasons, because there might be things that just come up within us because actually distractions allow us to not deal with them. Work gives us an opportunity to not have to face what's going on inside of us. And when that happens, I know what I can do. I can do one of two things. I can go, I can't face this now, and so I'm just going to keep doing other tasks. I'll clean the house. I'll do that, the menial tasks to get things done. Or I can think to myself, I'm doing this Sabbath thing wrong. Maybe I think both. But I can't be doing this Sabbath thing right because there's no delight and joy in this. I think there's another option in that moment. I think the option in that moment is to see it as an invitation. It's a two-part invitation. It's an invitation from God to not ignore what's going on within us that is hard, sorrowful, or broken. And then a chance in recognizing that to offer it to God as an invitation to say, come in and deal with the tough stuff. Help me to work on healing. Because can I tell you, God loves doing healings on the Sabbath. It's what Jesus got into trouble for the most when it comes to Sabbath. There's one other time he didn't, and I'll deal with that in a minute, but every other time he got into trouble about doing something on the Sabbath, it was because he healed someone. He loves nothing more than to heal someone. It's what he's all about. So maybe rather than judging ourselves or being suspicious of what's going on in ourselves, let alone in others, because sometimes what it'll raise up is suspicion or judgment about others, we might say, God, what would be the Sabbath experience in this? What do you want to do? Because it's really impossible to receive the day when you're exhausted. If you don't, then say, let's offer that to God and deal with it. There'll be times when you're also in Sabbath community, when with your spouse, your family, or friends, the way they're doing it intrudes on you. There's not a lot of peace or joy in that for you. I'd say, let's not let that become a moment of false peace, but let's use that as an opportunity to ask, how might we let this be delight? Sorry, I had a foot cramp. I just wanted to keep going again. To let this be something that we seek God on how we can move through. Let me read you quickly an example of this that Dan references between him and his wife. My wife and I were taking a Sabbath walk and talking about a disappointing time she'd had with a friend. The more we talked, the more I could feel death creeping in to take us away from the day. It was an important conversation, and I didn't want to say, this is not a Sabbath conversation. But I knew our pleasure in being together was waning, and I asked her, if we both believed that there was joy in knowing Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of sharing his suffering, what do you think would be different about this conversation? Neither of us had a clue. She at first felt defensive, and I felt stuck. We could escape to a more pleasant conversation, yet that would give death another victory. Sabbath joy requires the exercise of starts and stops, failing and then getting back up to mock despair. Becky suggested we walk and quietly pray and listen to the pulse of goodness in the forest surrounding us. After a while, she said, my friend is full of accusation and hurt. I didn't want to stop her assault for fear of her fury would get worse. I endured her, and I didn't really care for her. I listened to her words and watched her face. She was telling the truth, yet there was no sign of wonder or joy. She had made the shift from being irritated by her friend to accepting her failure. All I knew to do was to ask, are we any closer to joy? She smiled and said, leave me alone, Mr. Sabbath. We started laughing. Her smile returned, and the twinkle in her eye was enough for me to see the clouds had lifted and the sun was shining again. Such an utterly insignificant moment passed, and we re-entered the conversation with far more curiosity and care. We don't have Sabbath joy and gratitude and not deal with hard stuff. It's maybe more about how we deal with hard stuff. Ruth Barton, in her book on Sabbath and sabbatical, Embracing the Rhythms of Work, and she has some steps on how you might rest with God in hard things. And I've made a copy rather than referencing it for you. We've got way too much stuff today. If for you that is relevant, I'm just going to leave it here on the bench. You don't even have to come get it now. Just come get it if you want it, when you want it. But we can find joy in the midst of and through. We can find delight as we remember that Sabbath isn't a vacation. Sabbath is a grateful celebration. The Sabbath is not an escape from death. Instead, Sabbath is the promise that death doesn't win. Words from Dan Allender that say it beautifully. We live in a now, not yet. We'll get more when we get to heaven. But I want you to know Jesus wants it to be delight. The one time I mentioned where it wasn't that is in these verses, where he has been walking on the Sabbath, and they're walking through a grain field, and the disciples are picking off the grain heads, and the Pharisees, in their usual way, are like, they're doing what is unlawful. But he doesn't say it to them, he says it to, because he's the rabbi, says it to Jesus. Have a listen to the reply. He answered, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? Why use that story? Because they loved to claim how wonderful and hard after God David was. Yeah. In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Look at the work he did. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. Nothing is higher, and no approach of religiosity or even of consecrated sacred life. Let's not turn sacred. Sabbath is a beautiful sacred thing, but it's not greater than God. Jesus is Lord of it. He is now our Sabbath, and you are not bound to anything, even in what I'm talking about. It is all invitation, and it is all on how will it bring you to a place of greater connection to God, of greater grace and glory for Him, and of balance in life and balance in relationship. The Sabbath was made for you. Jesus has said it. It was made for you. So what might give you delight? For me, I like Ruth Haley Barton's words, putzing around. I think I'm one of those. I quite enjoy slow conversations. I enjoy meandering walks. I like long, relaxing couch time in my library or at the back of my house looking out at the vista on a couch and leisurely reads. What about you? It's playing a board game, hosting friends for a meal, going for a bushwalk or a mountain climb. I don't mind a walk, but I'm not doing a bushwalk. I'm not doing a mountain climb, that's for sure. Not on my day off. Playing a game of basketball, enjoying some work on your car project, writing poetry, playing music, getting lost in the creative process, keeping particularly delightful activities just for the Sabbath. There's a person who reads but keeps one particular author or style of book for just the Sabbath as the delightful activity to do on a Sabbath. What might that be for you? Rabbi Herschel says the Sabbath is not dedicated solely to spiritual goals. It is a day of the soul as well as the body. Comfort and pleasure are an integral part of the Sabbath experience. Man in his entirety, all his faculties, must share its blessing. We don't have time today to do my final activity, but I'd encourage adults and kids alike to think about if you want to take one that is over there for you. And it's a Sabbath wheel. And as families, I'd say do it together. Now, there's an option where it actually lists what you might do for the day. You could spin it and choose one, and who gets to choose. Maybe all of you get to choose one, and you do it throughout the day. From play a game to call or visit, it says family. It could also be friends. To read scripture or other good books. To sing, play, or listen to good music. We have the split pins, we have the paper, and exercise in thinking about which of those. But not only that, I found a way to design them so you have a blank template option. And you can sit and work out your own. And then as couples, individuals, as families, having decided what is for each of you, you can work out how together you might embrace each other's delight and joy and also have time individually. What would give you the greatest sense of abiding goodness in the Father's arms? That's what we should pursue. He longs for us to enjoy the day with him and enjoy him in the day. We're going to finish there rather than doing a song, which would be lovely to do, but in terms of time. I recognise that some people have wonderfully or not taken the kids for the last couple of minutes, so you might like to bring them in to grab one of these. You're welcome to do that yourself. I have the split pins. I'm not going to leave them loose because I don't want anybody to get hurt. I want to let you know, we didn't explain earlier why we didn't have kids' church today. Can I tell you? It's because we do not have enough people to do kids' church. I cannot in good conscience wear out people doing kids' church more than once every 3 or 4 weeks. That's not fair to them. So I would encourage you, we can make this work. We've made this work. It's lovely to have them in. I'm all for having moments of that. And we do it in school holidays. But maybe you could pray about it even just once every 6 weeks you were in a position to help. It's probably our greatest need in volunteering and serving to provide Sabbath break for our parents and to provide quality, kid-focused learning about Jesus for our kids because they matter. Apart from that, remember to wish Frank and Robin well. Have a fantastic time of exploring what might be next for you in Sabbath delight. Honestly, whether it's for 5 minutes or 5 hours, do something that brings you delight today and thank God for it. Have a great week.